Namaskar. In this episode of Dil Se, we're going to talk about the budget of 2024-25, which has just been presented in Parliament. I would have thought that after 10 years of Modi's rule, the economy should have been transformed by now, because he was extremely unhappy about the way the UPA dealt with the economy. But after 10 years, this particular budget, according to me, is a somewhat lackluster budget. It really provides nothing to anybody. After 2016, the decision on demonetisation on the 8th of November destroyed the MSME sector. In 2019, this government, Modi's government, tried to give benefits to the corporate sector by reducing tax rates. The corporate sector did not deliver. They just cleaned up their balance sheets. The agricultural sector this year, for example, its growth rate has come down from almost 4% to 1.4%. So that's not doing well. The MSME is destroyed. The corporate sector is not delivered. And luckily for this government, which is now a coalition government, Modi has got some benefits from the Reserve Bank of India in terms of dividends, and I think the total dividends are about 2.9 lakh crores, 2.1 lakh crores. That's a huge benefit. So we're going to discuss the scenario and whether there is a roadmap for the future in this budget and what needs to be done for the economy to revitalize the animal spirits that we keep on talking about. And we have three extraordinary people with us. Let me introduce you to Jayati Ghosh, who is taught for 35 years in the JNU, got a PhD in economics from Cambridge University in 1983. She is, has written about globalisation, about international trade, employment, macroeconomic politics. She's author of a dozen books, of any number of papers. I could go on and on. She is, consulted by the UNDP, the ILO. She is, I think she's now recently been appointed by the Secretary General on an expert committee. So we have, a person who knows about India, who has talked about poverty in India, talked about what needs to be done, especially in the health and education sector. I've heard you before. We have Arun Kumar, who's been on our show a few times, and he too, of course, he is partly a physicist, having got a degree from Princeton in physics, and of course a great economist. And you have done enormous work in developmental economics, authored books, specialist in the black economy, written books on that and papers on that. And we have now Himanshu, who's also a JNU product. You're also a JNU product. Himanshu has also been, actually, you've been advising the government in several capacities. And of course, as a young student, you've been sort of awarded, recognized, your work has been recognized. You did your MPhil from the Center of Economic Studies and Planning. And you've been a research fellow in economics in the Humanities Center of Science and Humanities, and a fellow at the Research Center of the London School of Economics. So we have some real experts. You were awarded the Sanjay Thakur Young Economist Award by Indian Society. So you have people here who know about the Indian economy, which is what I thought, that I'm not an expert in economics, but I thought I'd benefit from your presence. So let's start off with you, Jayati. What's good about this budget?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I think the problem with this budget really is that it's coming at a time, as you mentioned, when after a decade of really quite a lot of major knocks for the Indian economy, A lot of them self-inflicted, as you said, demonetization, really badly.
Apart from the pandemic.
The pandemic, of course, but also the way the pandemic was handled, which was really not necessary and without compensation to actually impose lockdowns on a dominantly informal workforce. I mean, no other country did it quite as badly as we did. So yes, after all of these knocks, and recognizing the massively growing inequality in the country, the very, very K-shaped recovery, the fact that most of the increases in national income and increases in wealth are concentrated in a very, very small part of the population, that there would be some recognition of the problem. And it's also interesting that they seem to recognize it. I think that, okay, the positive...
Economic survey seems to recognize it.
Well, you know, the way they recognize it is really only in talk. So there's been a lot of talk, right? So employment is there. There's an acronym employment based on various things that they declare that are their goals. So they recognize it's a problem. They were in denial. And all this time, they were in denial that employment is a problem. And yet it's one of the most critical problems. We are losing our demographic dividend. We have tens of millions of young people coming into the workforce every year not getting jobs. And it's really a crisis situation. Unfortunately, because they have been denying it all this time, they haven't really thought about it. They have no roadmap. They have no idea how to address it. And so how do they try and address it? By a few really minor attempts at providing subsidies for formal employment, for new entrants. And of course,
but they think the corporate sector will deliver there.
That's what is extraordinary, because you know the way it's designed, in fact, this would probably just subsidize already planned employment or existing employment. There's no reason for it to generate new employment. They tried to copy the Congress apprenticeship scheme, but you know obviously they didn't read it properly, so they've got a kind of mashed up version which frankly is completely unrealistic and also too small to make any difference. So they don't seem to have any ideas about how to generate employment. At the same time, they're continuing with the past strategy, which is really denying the basic services, any kinds of resources, you know, health. I mean, the public health spending of the central government last year was 0.25% of GDP. Unthinkable. You know, when I tell anyone outside the country, they don't believe it. They think I'm making it up. 0.25%. And it is not going to grow next year. Imagine a budgetary outlay that is going to be less than 0.25% of GDP on health. On education, there is some increase,
but it's
marginal, and it's barely keeping pace with inflation. Pensions, you know, which we have an aging population as well as a young one. And the outlay for it is exactly the same, which is the same as it has been for the last 3 years, which means 500 rupees a month for a very small number of people. Unbelievable that this is the way. Farmers had expected so much, and after years of protest and after very clear proposals and suggestions...
He just made a statement just now saying that, look, as far as the farmers are concerned, I delivered on the OROP. Just yesterday.
Well, what can I say? You know, I think the fact is that earlier perhaps these statements could be made and you could get away with them. That doesn't happen anymore. It's clearly now people are less willing to just accept everything that is being said.
Arman, the ILO says that of the total unemployed in this country, 83% belong to the youth.
Yeah.
Now, how are you going to create that kind of employment? Now they say the roadmap is that you will have a central portal, and all those who are registered in the EPFO, right, will register in the central portal. We don't know what the eligibility criteria will be. Will it be first come, first served? God alone knows. And which corporation will take whom, I don't know how that choice will be made, right? And whether that particular corporation, or 500 of them, whether they need those people or not, God alone knows. The total outlay would be 60,000 crores, right? Now, as it is, I think those corporations give more than 5,000 crores a month. So how is this going to work?
So, Kapil, I think we have to understand that this budget came post-election, right? And in the election, the results, the ruling party did not do as it was expecting. So there's clearly a disjuncture between what they thought and what has happened. I think that has, awakened them to a certain extent that they need to do it. So what they do in part A of the budget speech is to announce a lot of things, Dalits, tribals, employment, farmers, everybody, because you can say whatever you like. But the question is, what is your allocation for each of them? And I think that's what Jayati was pointing to. The allocations to the schemes, how do we know whether they have increased or not? Here we have an interim budget, which was pre-election.
Yeah.
So if we compare the data of the pre-election, that the interim budget, with the post this thing, we don't see much of an increase. The budget size has increased by just 1%, from 47 lakh crores to about 48 lakh crores, right? So if you don't have that much additional resources, how much resources will you give? And what they do is lots of tricks. They'll say we are giving 2 lakh crores, but that 2 lakh crores may be over 5 years. Okay. So it's not as if it is being done now, right? Similarly, you say we give 1 lakh crores to such and such, but that would be over 5 years, or that could be through loans. That's not a budgetary allocation.
Right.
So there's a lot of trickery in the thing. So we have to analyze the budget more carefully. And I think what Jayati was saying is that if you look at the employment situation, then what is it that the budget has for the employment? That's what your question was.
Yes.
So we need to know what is the total unemployment, which we need to tackle. Now, according to the report that we prepared in 2022, we see that 28 crore Indians don't have a proper job, or they have left the job market completely because they don't have a job. So they're underemployed, they're disguised unemployed, right. They are people who have left it, and then they're unemployed. So 4 different categories. So that's 28 crores. And every year, how many children are potentially in the job market? According to our estimate, 24 million. Yeah. Government is saying we only need to generate 8 million jobs. Right. So quite clearly, they're underestimating the problem. And even the 8 million...
requirement is about 12 million, I believe.
No,
jobs.
They are saying 12 million, but we have estimated that 24 million are potentially those who've done their 15 years, 17 years, 19 years, 21 years, and then coming to the job market, right? So that's actually 27 million. We reduced 25% who would be women who for social reasons will not come. So it becomes 24 million. So potentially we have to solve the problem of 28 crores plus 2.4 crores. So we have to generate at least 5 to 6 crore jobs every year. Now the schemes...
2 crore तो उन्होंने कहा था कि भाई 2014 में हम करेंगे.
But the point is that you see, whatever they said, today you have to sort out the problem of the youth and of the women, because large number of women are not able to get work. If you have to do that, you have to have focus on the unorganized sector. The organized sector will not generate jobs. It's hardly 6% of the total employment, right? 94% is the
but
unorganized.
Do they have the data for the unorganized sector?
Well, they seem to be getting some data from agriculture,
very
some
recent
from the
survey.
recent ASUA survey, but the ASUA survey is also faulty. As far as I wrote a piece on that saying, why is it faulty? We don't have the census data, we don't have the proper sampling data for it, and therefore there's a problem with that also, right? So my point is that, what is being given, we have to see to the labor-intensive sectors in the budget.
Yes.
What they're allotting is to the capital-intensive sectors, and they're cutting back on the labor-intensive sector. Like, for instance, the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, 86,000 crores, no change. So in real terms,
some states they don't even pay that money.
Exactly, West Bengal for 3 years.
So in real terms, its allocation is down. Then education and health, which you referred to, those are labor-intensive areas where a lot of employment can be generated for the educated. There, the allocations are much less, than what they should be. Then you have rural development, which is again...
Where are the jobs? आप कह रहे हो ना कि भाई jobs can be created. Where are the jobs at? Like?
So agriculture has 46% of the employment, and the MSME sector, 97.5% is in the micro sector. So you have 11.5 crores.
They have destroyed the MSME sector.
No, so therefore you have to boost it.
How will you boost it? They don't have the money. No, I'm sorry to say.
It's not that they don't have the money. They don't have the will to raise the money. There's so much inequality, so many rich people, you can tax them, you can raise, people have been talking about inheritance tax, wealth tax, and various other things. And the black economy. The black economy means people who should be paying taxes are not paying. The top 3%, what they should be paying, they're paying only a fraction of that. So our direct tax GDP ratio is only about 6.2% now, okay? Yes. Whereas even most developing countries will have 9, 10, 11%, developed countries would have 20, 22%, right? We are way down. So we depend on indirect taxes, which again hurt the poor people, which hurt the
indirect taxes
sector.
Are actually going down, I believe, and the direct taxes are going up.
Slightly,
the data, slightly.
Very slightly, but overall, we depend on the indirect taxes, which tend to be regressive, which affect inflation, which affect the poor. So we need to revamp, we need to raise the resources. But what's happening? We cater to the organized sector, but not to the unorganized sector. The organized sector gets the funds, unorganized sector gets the cuts. And then after that, what you do is you don't raise the resources, then you say fiscal deficit has to be maintained lower and lower, therefore you spend less and less. So you have to say today when demand is short, let the fiscal deficit rise a little or don't cut it so much. This RBI thing is actually a deficit financing.
Yes.
2.1 lakh crore
Of
is
course.
purely deficit financing.
Absolutely. And they've also borrowed from the market big time.
No, borrowing from the market is part of the fiscal deficit, right? But the point is that you see, if you can raise more resources, you can spend more on education, more on health, on employment generation and so on, and to help the micro sector. The micro sector has three problems: marketing, finance, and technology, right? That's why the average employment in the micro sector is 1.7. Now, how much marketing, technology, and finance can they do? So they need to form cooperatives, they need to move in that direction and so on.
So you think that the vision in the budget is
Vision is not
lacking?
there to actually solve the problem of the unorganized sector. They're only solving the problem of the organized sector. They're helping the organized sector. But organized sector will not offer employment because highly automated, mechanized, and now with AI, they are themselves saying
we'll
that
come
there'll
to
be a
that
problem
something
that'll
a
come up.
little later.
So therefore, they have to cater to the unorganized sector, to the micro sector, to the farming sector. Then things will turn around.
Himanshu, what's your solution?
I think solution obviously has to come from an understanding of what is wrong with the economy. And for this government, I think they have no clarity on what is wrong with the economy. You're right that at least the economic survey points out that these are the problems. But these are the problems which are well known. I mean, one doesn't have to get a data to tell you that unemployment is a big problem in this economy. I mean, you might go to the shout from the rooftop that there is no unemployment problem, but the ground reality is now, at least the elections also have shown. So it's a very forced recognition of the reality that unemployment is a problem, and so more or less they are doing it. I think the real problem is the understanding that the economy can be actually be managed by passing it over to the private sector.
Yes.
So the broader philosophy in that sense, and this is where I think this government, at least you can give them credit, that they've been consistent. They believe that the private sector is the one which should actually be.
They've actually given up on the private sector. If you
Not
ask
at all, actually. No, they're not
angry, but they're still hoping.
They're angry. It's like a kind of they're angry at the betrayal. They're angry at the betrayal that it's like a partner. I mean, we had a partnership and you are not living up to the partnership. Yeah. But they're still putting the faith on that. So that marriage has not broken. That marriage is still continuing, and so they still believe that it is the private sector that should be actually doing the heavy lifting in that sense, despite the fact that the tax cut that was given to them in 2019 was basically, as you mentioned very clearly, they have taken away the entire money, cleaned up their balance sheet. Absolutely. And then said they basically have done a. But in the employment thing also, I think the real problem is basically this understanding. And so the problem, all of that that you talked about, is that they don't understand that. They actually don't believe that it is the state's responsibility and that to create jobs or actually to provide the social services or to provide. And I think there is a philosophy that we should be talking about. Their philosophy is that public education is bad. It should be privatization. It should be private sector which will like to take over. In health, it is the same. Health is again the same kind of a thing. Same thing about public infrastructure. Same thing about that. So one is not surprised that they think that there is the private sector that should be actually doing even the heavy lifting of creating jobs. The problem is that the private sector is not going to do it, and that is not going to do it is simply because you have not kept your part of the bargain. That part of the bargain is that the government has to create demand in the economy, and unless there is a demand in the economy, even if you give them pots of money, no private sector company is going to simply absorb. Yeah, simple as that.
Exactly.
That is what they are not understanding, and I think in that sense.
Then what's the roadmap for creating demand?
I mean,
that's really the key question now.
I think it's a simple, very simple recipe. I mean, it's not something which is rocket science. And since Keynes onwards to the whatever is even the capitalism, golden period of capitalism, others that you're there to think of. I mean, government has to step up, has to basically invest not just inject public money, public expenditure by creating demand, and then the multiplier thing takes over. But again, the multiplier thing is not something which is that you give money to the corporate sector. You have to look at where the demand is going to be leading to much higher creation of employment. So if the money was given to the rural sector, NREJ wages were raised.
Therefore, your solution is
Very
give
simple.
money to the rural sector.
Absolutely. You raise incomes
Give
of the
more money in
farmers.
the hands
Of the farmers.
more money in the hands of ordinary people.
Or wage workers, wage workers.
Wage workers.
So-
Increase the minimum wage to
Absolutely,
400.
absolutely,
Those are the
absolutely.
kind of things you're talking about.
Absolutely. So exactly what Himanshu says. The farmers are demanding a guarantee on the minimum support price. If you have a guarantee like that, that provides an assured income which generates demand in the rural areas. NREGA, similarly, very high multiplier effect. Studies find multiplier of 4. You spend 1,000 rupees, 4,000 rupees worth of demand gets created.
Jayati, in the developed world,
Yes.
and I know for a fact, that the rate of tax
Yeah.
is actually much more
Of
than
course.
the rate of tax here.
Much,
right?
much more.
At 40%. I
Yes,
remember, and I'm talking
absolutely.
about, I was working in Wall Street way back in 1978, 79. And I was in New York City, and I was paying more than 40% tax.
Yes,
even
that's
at
right.
that point in
Yes.
time. Even today, that's the position.
That's right.
Right?
Yes.
Now, why is it that the corporations are not being taxed?
Kapil, Warren Buffett said that I pay much lower rate of tax than my secretary does.
Yeah.
He says capitalism will not survive.
Of course.
Okay, and then he said the rich have to pay more tax.
It's
This is
absolutely.
supported by-
Therefore,
But- so
one
that
of the
is-
things is
If you look
Yeah.
at, what
pay more tax.
Yeah,
So
what
that-
Henry Ford said, in 1911, he said, why should I mass produce the cars unless my worker can buy the cars,
Right.
So again, the question of demand. Now in India, the problem is that the unorganized sector, as you rightly said, which is 94% of the employment, if that is declining, then the demand would not be there.
Exactly.
So unless you generate demand there, and that's what Jayati is saying, that's what Himanshu is saying, rural areas, micro sector where there are 11 crore workers,
And
if you
health
raise their
education.
incomes,
Yes,
then,
healthcare.
then only will you find that the demand will rise. If you only cater to 6% to the organized sector, then the demand, and that's why RBI's data says capacity utilization data for the organized sector for the last 10 years is hovering between 70 and 75%. Now, if you can produce 100 cars, but you're only selling 70, 75 cars, you want to increase capacity to 110.
Correct.
So unless that capacity utilization rises, and that's only for the organized sector, the unorganized sector has been declining. There, the capacity utilization is probably very low. So what we need to do is create this circle of demand by catering to the unorganized sector, which will include.
So what are the steps, Jayati, that you should take?
So I would say, and it could be happening immediately double spending on health. We are one of the worst globally in terms of how much we spend on health. It's a very employment intensive sector also. Okay. Immediately massively increase your spending on education to deliver good quality education.
Right.
Okay. Actually meet the demands of the farmers because they are sensible demands and they have positive macroeconomic effects as well.
Right,
Okay.
right, right.
Let's assume that you actually do a rights-based approach. You are looking at health, education, old age pensions at a viable way, let's say half the minimum wage or something, and meeting the employment needs through a combination of employment guarantee in both rural and urban areas and the micro enterprises. Okay. Now, all this costs money. Let's say it will cost you, I don't know what, 4 or 5% of GDP
Yes.
to do all of this.
Yes.
We did a calculation a few years ago. It was about that much.
Okay.
If you tax a wealth tax of 2% on Indian centimillionaires only, centimillionaires means they have more than $100 million of assets.
Right.
Okay? And a 2% tax, which has been proposed globally by Gabriel Zucman and others, G20 has just endorsed some
Okay.
of this. Many of the finance ministers of developed countries and developing countries are pushing for this.
Correct.
Okay? India has actually supported this
Yes.
in the UN, not here.
Here they have to, you see, they're the quid pro quo from the
This is the
corporate
problem.
sector. So
But
how
if
will
you
they
did-
support that?
If you did a 2% tax on this, you are generating 1.5% of GDP. With 1.5% of GDP, you can 50% increase, in fact more than 150% increase in your health spending.
Right.
For center and states put together.
But let's forget the wealth tax. What about income tax?
So here is the thing. The idea will be to you focus on taxing the rich.
Right.
We are too obsessed with taxing
Absolutely.
middle and lower income.
I agree.
And the income tax, you have to have it as a very gradated scale so that you are taxing the top incomes.
Absolutely.
1%, 0.1%.
That 9 crore people file tax return,
Right.
out of which 5 crore are filing nil or very small return.
Correct.
Okay? 1.5 crore, that's 15 million, file significant amount. That's what the Prime Minister said, they're effective taxpayers. 2 crore in between are the middle class who pay a little bit of tax. So this income tax concession that people talk about all the time actually benefits only this 2 crore out of 140 crore.
That's absolutely right.
So therefore, we can raise income taxes.
That's what I believe, that we should raise income tax.
And
But
what
I
we need
would
to do is
say
broaden
raise
the...
it much more on the top.
Of course.
Of course, of course.
Which,
That's really where.
Yeah, but that's what we're talking about.
So-
Those who have more, tax them more.
right.
As simple
so
as that.
make it more progressive, because our income tax rates are much lower than many other countries, you know. So we could raise those tax rates, we could get more. And if you brought in by broadening the base, because there's a lot of black income generation, and that's where Jayati's idea of wealth taxation helps, because you can't hide your property. So therefore, when you pay more wealth tax, you pay more income tax also.
I mean, I have somewhat a
Yeah.
different idea on this.
Yeah.
You start the problem is, what is black money? Black money is generated when your family cannot possibly meet your daily needs from the income that you get.
That's
the
not
work
true.
that you do. By and large, that's true. I mean, a teacher, for example, he has a family of four.
they-
What salary do they get? What expenditure is
So,
made?
but you have a large number of people who are professionals, you
I'm
are
not talking about.
businessmen,
I'm
and
talking
so on.
about. I'm talking about the ordinary
But
people.
they don't
of this
generate
country.
much black. It's the black is generated by upper income categories, which are professionals, businessmen, and so on. See, I mean, look at the income distribution. The eShram portal tells you that of the 30 crores registered, 94% are earning less than 10,000 rupees,
Yes.
which is way below the taxable
Exactly.
limit, right?
Exactly.
So large number of people outside the tax limit, given our high this thing, now you begin to pay tax at about 7 lakhs of rupees, which is 60,000 rupees of per month income. What we are escaping is the large amount of black income generated by businesses through under-invoicing,
Businesses,
over-invoicing.
yes. That's
Under-invoicing,
different.
over-invoicing.
That's different.
Right?
Those are not ordinary people. They are they
that's why you have to
under-invoice,
catch it.
over-invoice.
That's why you have to catch it, you know. And the share of profit in the GDP is rising. So you could be able to tax that, you know, more effectively and get a lot more
And what
tax.
about taxing those who play in the stock market?
So that has already been there. I don't- there is
Financial.
12.5%. What is
No,
that?
you see,
In many parts of the world, it is as much as the personal tax
it's
that you
not the
pay.
rate so much as actually implementing the
Yeah,
rate,
right.
preventing the illicit financial flows that were just mentioned, you know, under-invoicing, over-invoicing, preventing the avoidance of tax, which is perfectly legal, rather than the evasion.
Right.
And so you need to plug those loopholes. And you need to plug the ability of many people to just actually shift the money away. The super rich in India do not keep their assets in India. But we now have exchange of banking information. We know where they keep at least the financial assets. And it is possible to tax wealth wherever you hold it if you are an Indian taxpayer.
So the international agreements now coming into
Yeah.
force on minimum taxation, because there's been a race to the bottom.
Right.
After the Soviet Union collapsed, East Europeans did not have the capital, so they started lowering the tax rate. Everybody else also started lowering the tax rate, and therefore you could not finance the social services in various countries. Now the agreement is that we should have a 15% minimum tax. Otherwise, countries are going down below that also. So Yellen, when she came, she tried to get this G20 to agree to that, and other countries to also agree to that. So we have to tackle that problem. That, you know, our income tax rates, our corporate tax rate, they can both go up, and we can get substantial amount. And if we implement wealth taxation, to pay your wealth taxation, you have to declare an income, right? So therefore, your income taxation also goes up. So they're interlocked. Similarly, corporate tax, because of the under-invoicing, over-invoicing, the business income should be on gross profit tax rather than on net profit. Because you put all your costs onto it, you over-invoice the cost. And that's why you are able to show a lower income.
That's right.
So therefore, if you go for gross profit taxation rather than net
You'll
profit
be up in
taxation,
arms if you say anything like
I
that.
agree, but these are possible mechanisms that we've been talking about for the last 35 years, that we could collect a lot more tax. So instead of collecting 6.25% of direct taxes, we could go up to 12-13% if we actually properly implemented some of these taxes. So it's not that nation is short of resources, it's the will to collect the resources that is missing.
On the agricultural sector, what do you think should be done in agriculture to reform it, to make it more productive?
I think there are two parts to the agriculture story. One is obviously that one has to think of agriculture as any business and farmers as businessmen.
Okay.
I mean, farmers are not here to do charity for you. They are here to earn income. They are here to earn livelihood. And it is the job of the government, it is the job of the state to provide remunerative profits to them. Some level of profits has to be provided them. And I think in that sense, the minimum that is required is to have a correct price policy, which we don't have, which we honestly don't have. We used to have a price policy, but now we don't have. Everything has been now clubbed together to one single price. And And in that sense, the incomes of the farmers have to increase. And so all of these multiplier impact is going to work on basically on that. That requires you to basically protect the farmers from uncertain prices, number one. Secondly, you have to protect them from vested corporate interests who want to take over the agricultural sector, because it's a highly profitable sector. It's all over the world. It's the returns that you get in agriculture is humongous. I mean, so all of these retail and all of these are there. And there's large agri multinationals who are willing to enter Indian market because a large agricultural market, large consumer market. So first is to protect them from these ones. You have to give them a stable remunerative prices. You have to ensure that in a stable kind of prices. Third is you have to basically make them part of the whole economic process, in the sense access to credit, access to various subsidies, access to various markets.
Bank credit? How is the bank credit?
That's where the government is supposed to enact those kind of provisions.
Unless the title to these lands.
All of these. They have allowed all sorts of exceptions for retail credit. I mean, now in this one particular example, they have allowed that a person's digital transaction can be used as a way of verifying what kind of so there are ways of doing that. If you want to do that,
Swaminathan Commission has solutions
to all of these. So I think I'm not getting it. So that's the number one part of it. The number two part is that we really need to increase agricultural productivity.
Yes, and this is the whole big problem.
Big problem.
I mean, we compare China to India and see per acre productivity.
Yeah, so we are. Now, this agricultural productivity increase obviously requires the government to invest between 2014 to 2018
in R&D.
In R&D,
yes.
But overall investment also in terms of soil conservation,
Also
irrigation, extension services, all of these things. Real terms, the agricultural investment in this government's first 4-year term actually declined in real terms.
Right.
And now it has almost been stagnant, in the sense, not been increasing in that sense. Even in this budget, for example, if you look at it, the whole promise, first promise, they are talking 100 seeds and all that. Not a single rupee has been allocated. All of these promises. This natural farming, she first talked about in 2019, zero budget natural farming, and we are going to bring
No, that natural farming.
Nothing happened.
Nothing happened, correct.
The budget allocated was
Again, she talks about natural.
the budget allocated was 400 crore. They spent 100 crores only that much.
That's correct.
So this is like a budget which is like all wishy-washy. You have to really, the Indian Council of Agricultural Research, there is no director on that. They hadn't appointed a director for that. It was running headless for about 2 years. You are not paying money to the agricultural universities. You are not paying money to your agriculture research institutions. You are not basically paying money to your seed breeding centers and
They actually don't believe in scientists at all.
They don't believe in
Indian Science Congress. Indian Science Congress.
They're not. So I think agriculture center requires a concerted effort, first in raising productivity, secondly in raising farmers' income, and the last point that I want to do, that we have actually been the largest producers in that sense. I mean, at least been so-called self-sufficient in cereals, rice and wheat production has gone up.
Yes.
Incidentally, in the last 2 years, when we are talking about record production, our inflation has been the highest in both rice and wheat itself. I mean, there is the data thing that I don't want to get into it. But on pulses and oilseeds, we are the largest importers. And these are all very thin market. And I do want to make it a point here that it is not because our farmers are not producing. They don't have the capacity.
Because of the import policy.
It's because it is helping certain corporates also. Yes. There is a huge amount of corporate nexus in this. And because of that, 60 to 70% of our total edible oil is imported.
That's what I said. It's the import.
In pulses now, it is going from 20% to 30%, hovering around that. And we have not been. We had a pulse. This budget, I'm talking about because this budget they have announced pulse and edible oil plan. This was there in UPA time, and pulse production actually increased quite substantially. The Planning Commission was also responsible for that.
Doubt on the data,
that's again
food grade production.
And all of that.
In spite of record production, in spite of banning export, prices still were rising. What it suggests is that your output data is not right. So the agriculture, not only productivity, but even the measurement of the output. If that is a problem, then your productivity will go up.
You are not willing to
lack of credible data is one of the biggest issues.
But census,
we don't know how many people there are.
If you don't have the 2021 census, how will you know?
But basic information. These are all kind of basic information that we are talking about, and I think the agriculture statistics is an important part of the whole thing, including the farmers' income, how much is there. They announced with fanfare doubling farmer income. Then after that, they suddenly got into panic because the farmers actually in real terms were starting to decline.
Because
and
the
then again,
input costs get are much higher.
it has been increasing. It has been
Yes, yes.
But I think they're raising productivity in basic crops, where we have a whole scope which is available, whole space which is available, and the farmers have done it. They have done it during Green Revolution. They have done it after that. They have done it even after that. But the government is not willing to put the money where its mouth is. So there you keep on saying all of this that we are doing. So unless we do that, in fact, the job part is again something which is where agricultural incomes increasing is the solution, is only solution actually, in fact, that if you cannot invest in agriculture, you cannot raise farmers' income, there is not going to be any solution.
45% of our people are in the rural
But
area.
I want to add something else here, which is that we are not recognizing the impact of climate change on
Yes.
agriculture
Yeah,
in
yeah,
particular.
absolutely.
So many other countries that I have traveled to recently, they have actually set up specific strategies and thinking about how they can actually address this specifically for cultivation. We are one of the worst affected countries, and it's already happening. We're having all kinds of variation in rainfall and so on and so forth. There is no plan to deal with this. And if we don't address this, then the current strategies are not going to work 3 years from now.
No,
4
I
years
agree.
from now.
I agree with
You have to anticipate those. You have to put in both the science and the economic policies that will enable farmers to handle this. And somehow it doesn't seem to be even an awareness of this.
All right,
As Himanshu was saying, research on this is very important, but allocations are not there.
Yeah,
As he said, you're going to produce 120 crops or something which will be crop resistant, but if you look at the allocations, there's no increase in allocation to agriculture.
by and large, this government in the last 10 years has not been interested in actually R&D at all.
And therefore, we are lagging behind China. Now
45 billion is what
Yeah.
they do in R&D,
Right.
as opposed to 600 billion in US and 500 billion in China.
So we spend 0.7% of
0.7%
GDP on R&D,
R&D.
whereas China spends 3%.
Let me
And
add to
also
that.
on R&D,
If you add the total budget of all agricultural institutions, ICAR, NAS, central universities, agricultural university, all of that, their budget actually has declined in nominal terms.
absolute amount. In absolute
has
amount.
declined.
That's the reality. That's the reality that we're talking about. Then how are we expecting the agricultural
Yeah,
production?
and how would the demand increase then in those areas?
And
That's
also,
what we say.
therefore, we're lagging behind China. Now, in this budget, till now, we were saying we are going to restrict the capital flows from China. We're going to restrict
we
trade.
can't. We can't even
Now
do all
we've
we can't.
accepted that.
want
We've
to
accepted
Yes,
that,
exactly.
and we want to attract capital.
That's
Now the
correct.
question is, what happens to your strategy?
Yes.
Your strategic idea was that you are confronting at the border. So there's an admission that things are not going well.
Yeah.
Now to repair that, what is required? They're not doing that.
So they say that they have removed poverty, but the fact is that they continue to give the dole, they continue to do all that. That also is an admission.
No,
Yes.
it's also removing it by renaming it,
Yes.
Yes.
by defining it in some different way so that you can say, yes, there are.
But from a long-term standpoint, I mean, I want your thoughts on it. Unless you give primacy to education, right, really empowerment of the child ultimately will produce compounding results as far as its impact on skills, on growth, on jobs is concerned, and in health. So unless these two things, from a long-term standpoint, you must give primacy to education and health
I
from
think
a long-term standpoint.
I completely agree with you, and I think that's obvious, and people around the world now recognize this, that you have to actually emphasize health and education as critical
And
sectors
quality
for
education.
future. Quality education
Quality.
accessible to all,
That's correct.
not differentiated by who
Absolutely.
can pay how much.
Absolutely.
But you see, the other thing about it though is, and I just want to repeat it, it's definitely important for the long term, but it's a short-term strategy for employment generation also.
That's correct.
Quite apart, and you have to actually treat health workers and education workers as proper professionals. Not give, Anganwadi workers and Ashas, etc., not even called workers because you're not paying them the minimum wage.
Right.
So the
And-
Acer reports show, which are coming from 2005, and the last report was 5 months back, 14 to 18-year kids, 40% cannot do second-class reading,
Yes,
writing,
yes,
or maths,
that's
right?
This
And
has been going on for years, incidentally.
But this is the
got worse after
yeah,
got worse.
this is the first time they say 14 to 18-year-old
Right.
kids. They cannot do that.
Right.
So you can imagine that large number of kids do not get proper training. As Jayati is saying, we
There
need
are no
to
teachers, I'm sorry to say.
No,
There
so
are
we have
no
to recruit.
teachers.
We have to recruit teachers.
That's a difficult
We have
issue.
to train them properly and then recruit, and it's possible.
So it's a chicken and egg. We have to start somewhere.
I've been sort
Yeah,
of.
I know you've been
privy
associated.
to this. The problem I tell you is this: that how do you recruit a teacher? You do an advertisement for a whole state. You can't do it for a particular district. So the guy who gets the job lives 70 kilometers away, right? He then has an absentee teacher.
If you
So
remember
the process of recruitment is so difficult and faulty. So you need a short-term solution for it, and you need a long-term solution for it. Long-term solution is to have you build institutions for training of teachers, where again you have to invest, right? Government has to invest. They are not doing that. And the short-term solution is use technology, right? The fiber optic network is not is also not set up, so you can't use technology. So therefore, children don't get educated. This is a real problem.
But Kapil, if you remember, in the National Knowledge Commission, I don't know how many decades ago now already, but we had actually proposed that employment should be institution-based.
Yes.
Like I am employed, we were all employed by Nehru University.
Yes.
Similarly, every school should be able to employ its own teachers.
Yes.
So you don't get that problem of people who are absentee and people who are not.
Yeah, but they have to be trained teachers now.
Of
You
course.
don't get
So
them in the
you have
local
minimum
areas.
criteria, but you actually
Invest much
insist.
more in this.
Yes.
We've
Yes,
never
exactly.
We've never exceeded 4% of GDP.
It should be at least 6-7%.
The Kothari Commission in '68 said we should have 6%.
Yes.
Globally, it's accepted.
Yes.
Malaysia and others went to 10% of GDP.
There are many
so that
countries
they
in the
could-
world invest more than 10%.
In G20, we are the lowest.
Yes.
We are in both health and education. In G20, we're the absolute lowest.
So our labor productivity also goes up if you have good education and health. Labor becomes more productive, and therefore your
No, then you have to reform the secondary education system
Yes.
by inculcating skills in your education program itself.
So-
That also not is not
focus.
being
As you
done.
say, focus on education is very important. But as Jayati said, even in the short run, you generate employment. So therefore, it's both long term and short term.
Acha, now tell me, this artificial intelligence stuff, how is it going to impact our economy?
You know, already it's a relatively small share of employment that is going to be affected, as you said, right? Formal sector, a lot of it. But there's no doubt that it is going to be disruptive in ways that we are not
That
anticipating.
the economic survey, in fact, accepts that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is
Yes.
going to be highly
I
disruptive.
think globally it's accepted that not only will you displace semi-skilled jobs, which can be
Yes.
automatically done,
Service
call
related-
centers,
service-related
no,
jobs.
call centers,
But
BPO,
AI allows you
but
to replace us.
Yeah.
Yes,
for
yes,
example.
yes.
teachers, doctors, lawyers. I mean, I read an article about 6 years back which said that, a computer can absorb 1 lakh articles, a living doctor will absorb 1,000 articles. So what kind of chemotherapy you need, a computer will tell better than the doctor. So already this is on the line, and we are still on Chat GPT 4, 5. When by the time we get to 8, 10, then a lot of, even managerial jobs will actually get.
Yeah, we'll get.
So
I believe
therefore,
the IT sector
you-
is employing less people
Yes.
now.
Yeah, so you will need more, say, software people and more so, but that's a small segment. And in India, because of the lack of training, most children will not be able to get that. So you'll displace people where actually they have no other option. They have no other option to go where they can go. So therefore, the problem of unemployment will become more acute.
Exactly.
We have to therefore begin to think about the unemployment problem
And we
in
have
a
no
different
policy.
way.
This budget doesn't talk about it. Economic survey talks about
Yeah.
it, but the budget doesn't say anything about it.
But you know, if you look in terms of what are the potential employment generators of the future, I think there's no question it will have to be the care and creative industries. And in fact, organic agriculture, which is very labor intensive. But with proper
I just wanted
return.
to add that, I'm not so pessimistic about the technology front in the sense, this kind of a doomsday prediction has come even earlier when the motor car came in,
Computers came,
when the computers came. See, every time that there is a technological shift that happens, it is disruptive, but ultimately it ends up creating more jobs than actually
in
taking
some
up.
sectors.
Over
Some
time,
sectors,
over time
It's
and different
it's
kinds
a
of
shift in
jobs.
job
Yes,
rather than,
yes.
it's not something which is
Himanshu,
overall.
we're talking about different categories.
Yeah.
Where the job will be created, where it will be lost.
Lost.
Yeah,
Those
that is
people with less
that is
skills.
what the-
Cost benefit analysis
Exactly.
will have to be done.
That is where the job of the government is to basically manage that transition.
Yes.
That's why we need the state to manage that transition. The transition will be there. If you actually do not intervene in the transition, there is going to be an anarchy. That's a problem.
That's what people are pointing out, that we are not doing enough on education, skill building, etc. Therefore, we'll be in trouble.
I think the second point that I again was pointing out that all of you are right in that sense that the employment in this country has to come from in the rural areas, in small towns, in middle towns, and those ones, because those are the ones where still labor-intensive products can be used. You are not going to basically create those in South Delhi or in Central Delhi and other parts of it. I will give you a small anecdote and small story, which is actually based on data also. Between 2004-5 to 2011-12 is the UPA period, is when incomes rose very fast. Farmers' income rose the fastest, wages were rising very, very fast, and the maximum increase in employment in non-farm sector came from construction sector. Now, where is the construction sector employing? It is not in the highways and expressways. They are not ones.
Yeah.
You know, 80 to 85% of the private construction sector is actually poor households upgrading from a kacha house to a pakka house. That is entirely labor intensive. I mean, there is no machine that is used when a poor person basically upgrades from. And you have a large number of population. A farmer's income, if it's grown by even say 10% or 20%, the first thing, the asset they create is go from a kacha hut to a pakka hut, or maybe building a second floor or third floor.
Yeah.
That's a massive amount of job that can be created. And over a period of time, that becomes skilled ones. They move to the next level of products that they are consuming. So that we have to keep in focus. The idea of going to the 500 top companies and asking them that you now create a job and we'll give you money is not something which is going to work. So you're asking the question as to where the jobs are going to come from.
Right.
That is where the jobs are going to come from. That is where the income is going to come from. That is where the demand is going to come from. And that is where the skills are also going to come from.
And that'll reduce inequality also.
And
That'll reduce inequality
also. And I think one last point which I wanted to make is, I'm not so comfortable with this whole word of skill, which has become now a buzzword. It is something that the top private corporate sector has infused and like really thrust upon in the government. And all the governments and political parties are now stuck with this whole thing, that there's a skill problem and then a skill problem. This country has given an IT sector which became globally competitive in 1990 without the government creating those skills. I mean,
It's because of the educated few.
yeah. So basic education, your primary education, your secondary education, your tertiary education, industry will find it they will skill it.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, people who are trained in mechanical engineering,
Invest in it.
all of these Satya Nadellas to your, all of these guys, mechanical engineer, electrical engineers, and they became computer giants. I think the whole idea that we have to first skill, we create a supply and then the demand will come, is completely wrong way of looking at the whole example of it.
Absolutely.
I don't think we should get into this whole idea of that there's industry saying that half of them are unemployable. They're unemployable is because you don't want to pay money. The corporates don't want to pay money. If you want to pay money, I'm saying that's my answer to them is that the problem is cheap labor. They want a subsidized cheap labor which is already trained where they don't have to do anything in that sense. But this country is a good example of it. The whole IT revolution happened in 1990s, 35 years back, without all of this discussion coming into the picture. So I think we have to go back to what she was talking about. The primary job of the basic education, basic health, creating an infrastructure there, creating a kind of a workforce ecosystem there, all of the problems will automatically be taken care of.
I think that if the government listens into this, they may some get to do good ideas, but they're not used to listening. So I hope...
They're used to listening, but they're not used to
Acting.
Yeah.
No.
I don't think they listen
I
either.
don't think they listen either because, anyway,
They listen to the Congress manifesto and they try to do something.
they also,
they're not going to act on it.
fully
They're not
listen.
going to
They
act on
mislead
it.
it. They
didn't
mislead
get it. They didn't
But
get
anyway,
it.
but thank you very much. I think
Thanks.
this has been a very, very interesting discussion. I think we need more of these discussions and take particular sectors of the economy and see what solutions we can suggest.
Right.
And we hope the government will listen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.